Tow your tomatoes and stuff, all right? Okay. Now, actually, this is Mike Calvert, and some of you guys may know him, you know, because he's around Independence a lot. He's the president of the Civil War Roundtable of Missouri. Well, I'll never read my notes now. Mike's also on the board of the National Frontier Trails Museum, so you guys may be aware of that. He's also the chairman of Historic Preservation of the City of Independence. Been a lifelong resident of Jackson County. Says he lives basically within a mile of where he was born, and he just lives over off, what, Pleasant?
Off Pleasant Street,
Yeah. It was kind of the centennial of the war. He was about age 9 at the time. That's what sparked his interest in the war of northern aggression. He does have a Confederate ancestor. Matter of fact, his great-grandfather was living in the Confederate home of Higginsville. Died, I think you say 1942?
1942.
And he is buried at Higginsville. That grandfather's wife, then his widow, was the last living female resident of the Confederate Veterans Home, and she's buried there too, right? And they had an aunt, I believe.
I have a great aunt who I've lost track of over the years, but she was the last adolescent that lived there. Try to look up ancestry. His name's George Washington Brown.
Oh, was it a girl or was it a guy?
This guy.
Or do you mean the grandfather?
Grandfather, yeah.
George. Okay. He does a lot of public speaking in general. He's got a deal coming up. We'll be speaking at the Truman Library. He's also got a speech that, when you give him a speech on the last gunfight?
Well, next in August, I'm giving it to the Lions Club of Independence, the last gunfight on the Independence Square.
So that sounds like that was 1873, right?
1873.
So they were still slinging even in 1873. Okay, so with that, we'll give you Mike Calvert, all right?
Thank you.
Good job, Mike.
Actually, as you know, half of the players in that 1873 affair, one was James Peacock, who was the deputy sheriff of the city of Independence at the time. The other guy was Jim Crow Childs. So, interesting group. Well, I'll get through the crass commercialism of everything because my group won't allow me to do this without this, so to speak. Civil War Roundtable of Western Missouri, we've been in existence 20 some odd years now. Group. There's our website. I'm rather proud of that. It has lots of information. One thing we try to do on that website is to assimilate information about all the groups across the Kansas City area. So if you have something that you want to get on that website or enter our newsletter, just let me know, okay? We're happy to do that. There's my contact information, if you ever so want to, and where we meet and when we meet. Villages of Jackson Creek are on Jackson Drive over next to the Hilton Garden Inn, right next to that on the west side of the Hilton Garden Inn. But you didn't call me here tonight to talk about those things. You called to ask if I would talk about the Second Battle of Independence and talking to Civil War buffs. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell Larry that one thing that brought me into and told me the Civil War was cool was my mom and dad bought me a cannon, a toy cannon at the time, the Tyco cannon. If you remember that actually shot cannonball, that sealed the deal.
Oh, yeah.
That sealed the deal. But we're going to talk about the Second Battle of Independence tonight. It is often forgotten by a lot of people. It's sandwiched in between the Battle of Little Blue and the Battle of Byram's Ford. It does, however, rank in the top 384 battles in the United States recognized by the National Park Service, along with Little Blue, Byram's Ford, Westport. Who else? Lone Jack, just in Jackson County alone. So it has importance. The unfortunate thing is that, you know, as the City of Independence spread, it also built over everything that may have been fought over that day. Almost. The streets are still the same, so we know that. So let's go. I'll give you a list of characters going to be involved with us tonight. Sterling Price, of course, as we all know, commander of the Confederate forces on that day and that time. Fagan, who has quite a bit to do. Marmaduke, he's actually moved over to Byram's Ford, so he plays a little bit in this. Shelby, Not directly in the Second Battle of Independence, but he's playing an important part too in other places. You can't miss, you gotta have both sides. You can't miss Curtis. Curtis is in command of all the U.S. forces at the time, which includes not only the regular ones that are already into volunteer service, but also the Kansas National Guard, Kansas Service comes under his command also. And if those guys would have been just a little more brave, we would have actually fought the Battle of Westport at Little Blue, and we'd have been okay, but that's okay. James Blunt, not directly involved in the Battle of Independence, but he's an interesting character. He's the one who stands at Little Blue and sends the word back to Curtis that says, this is the place to fight this battle. This is the place to be. And if you've ever been to Little Blue, you understand why. He's got the high ground. He has sweeping fire across the thing. In fact, his moonlight with 400 or 500 soldiers and half a dozen cannon hold off Price for most of a day. So you get some idea. And here's the one character that comes into being, Alfred Pleasanton, again of the U.S. forces. We'll talk quite a bit about him. Okay. I apologize a little bit for this. Let me see if I can do something with this. We're in the process of meeting it. Is that better, I hope? Let me go through this. This is actually setting up, this is the evening of October 21st, 1864. We fought all day at Little Blue, fought all the way back into Independence, and this is where we find everything sort of about 5 o'clock, after 5 o'clock in the evening on the 21st, which I think we need to see. Shelby has made an advance into Independence. The 16th Kansas does make a stand here, which is about Maine and College. They fight there until they can't hold on anymore. They push on through, Shelby pushes on through. The 11th Kansas fights again here, still just holding up because the entire federal forces are on their way west. Curtis has told them that he honestly believes that Price is going to attack Kansas City on his way to Leavenworth. He honestly believes that, so he sets up his main line of force, and we'll talk about that in a second. The Union troops retreat. They retreat down what today we call Lexington Avenue. In the day and time, it was the Independence Westport Road. Sometimes it's called that. Sometimes it's called Byram's Ford Road. Sometimes it's called the Independence to Kansas City Road. It just depends on whose piece of the OR you're reading. Okay, well, let me come back one here. Let's go back up to Friday night for a second. Get over here and see the notes. Curtis has positioned himself on the west side of the Big Blue. If you want a position that is approximately where 27th Street would cross the Big Blue River. That is the center of his line. He has, and that line is rather long. It actually stretches from the mouth of the Big Blue, when it gets to the Missouri River, 15 miles south to Byram's Ford, and a little bit beyond. He has, north of the ford, he has, on the Independence to Kansas City Road, from the river's mouth, there was a General Dietzler, who's in command. That's from 27th Street to the mouth. Because once it breaks off, and I'll show you where it takes off here in a little bit, once the road, you go down Independence-Lexington Road to where it hits Blue Ridge today, take a left onto Blue Ridge, and there is a road there called Pitcher Road. Well, that Pitcher Road went down to the ford. Okay? And then the Independence to Westport Road continued south. Get you caught up there. Okay. The main ford, as I said, was Curtis's headquarters. Now the main ford south to Byram's Ford is under the command of General Blunt. At midnight, he had some 15,000 men in blue along that line of battle.
Wow.
15,000. And he has wired Rosecrans. Rosecrans is in charge of Missouri. He has wired Rosecrans and says, I am confident I can stop Price at this crossing, and hope you will come up on his rear and left, so that he cannot get out of Hickman's Mills. If you can get that position, we can bag Price if I succeed, as I hope to do. My losses have been considerable, but my troops are in good order and ready to make a stand at this place. Curtis is sure that Price is going to attack him there. Now, because he has communications with Rosecrans, but he has no communications with this guy. In fact, nobody really knows entirely where Pleasanton is. They know he's in somewhere in the rear of Price. Fact is, on the 21st of October, he's in Lexington, or just outside of Lexington. Okay. Because Curtis has no direct communication with Rosecrans, he decides to, there's a volunteer that comes forward by the name of David Botwell, or Daniel Botwell. He's in the 2nd Kansas, and it takes a long time to relate his story, but take it from me. He has a interesting night trying to find Pleasanton. He's in the river on a skiff. He's in between the Confederate lines trying to get to Pleasanton, and he finally finds him. And he explains, he finds Pleasanton camped on Fire Prairie Creek. Now, if you're familiar with Fire Prairie Creek, east of Independence, out near Buckner, Levacy area, and if you ever look at a map of that, you'll find that Fire Prairie Creek roams all over that valley. So I don't know exactly where he's at, but he's somewhere on Fire Prairie Creek, probably where the road crosses, the Independence to Lexington road crosses. Nobody ever says. And I should tell you that when you try to recreate this whole battle, that the written word that's left after this is written by people several years later. In a lot of cases, there's I've just found people have come forward with 2 diaries. One is from the 11th Kansas and one is from the 2nd Colorado, that actually were written the days that the battles were going on. I'll fight over that for a second. But most of the reports of this battle are written in December. So a lot of things they don't remember about Little Blue, a lot of things you don't remember about independence. But you have to remember, all these forces, both Confederate and Union, have been fighting for 2 months or 3 months at a time. So trying to discern each one is a little difficult. Okay. There's Mr. Okay. So here we are, that's where we're at the evening of October 21st. Let me see if I can get this one for you here. Let's wave around a little bit. Let's go to Saturday morning, October 22nd, 1864. What I have here is the disposition of some troops on that morning. They have occupied, really, it's kind of hard to tell exactly, everybody is everywhere. Price is camped with his 12,000 men or so, all through Independence. He has sent a group of men back to Little Blue, watching for Pleasanton to come up. He has, everybody has kind of fallen out every place they can fall out. In fact, there's a talk of one gentleman who said years later, as he went through Independence, he was driving down what's now Winter Road, and he points and says, "That's where I spent the night. That's where I camped at." And he was pointing to the intersection of Norton and Winter Road, if you want to go that way. This is what's going on. We have General Price here and his headquarters, which is Rock Creek. I'll catch this a little bit. Price is in his headquarters that morning, and he's got 3 decisions to make, or he finally has got to make a decision. He knows that Pleasanton is behind him. Curtis is in front of him, so he has to decide. Remember, all this time he's got the famous 500 wagon train with him that has grown, the cattle and things that are with him that have grown, and not to mention we don't know how many refugees have gone with him. So he has quite a retinue behind him. This wagon train will stretch 7 to 10 miles. So think about that, 7 to 10 miles. The end of the wagon train is in Independence. The head of the wagon train is in Byram's Ford. To give you an idea. Or the end of the wagon train is at Little Blue, and the head of the wagon train is at his headquarters. Independence to Little Blue is about 8 miles. So that's how far this thing is stretched out. But Curtis has got to make a decision. He's beginning to feel a little pressure. He has 3 things on his mind. He knows he's going to have to force a crossing of the Big Blue before Pleasanton comes up. He knows, and he says, I have to hold Pleasanton back until I accomplish the first thing, and he wants to prevent the capture of his wagon train. This wagon train, those of you familiar with Price's grade, this wagon train has played into everything that's made the decision by Price, or it's very prominent in there. One year I gave a tour. We didn't follow Price through all his battles. We followed the wagon train. And if you follow the wagon train, you get an idea of why the decisions that Price makes. So those are the 3 things. So this is what he does. He has Confederate forces spread throughout Independence. You got to believe that some are visiting family that they haven't seen for years, and they're just exhausted because they have been on the run, if you will, or advancing since August and fighting battles. Horses are beginning to wear out, so they're trying to get as much rest as they possibly can. They're there. Pickets, he sends pickets to be placed at Little Blue that evening. Major General James Fagan was given the orders to move the wagon train down the Independence Westport Road, sometimes known as Little Santa Fe Road too, by the way, while Shelby attacks the Union forces at the main ford. What happens is, as a side note, Shelby's orders are to hold the forces at the main ford while the wagon train goes south and then find another crossing. So he sends Jackman against the main ford, and that's happening first thing in the morning. Okay. About 9 o'clock in the morning, in fact, Shelby sends Jackman against against the main ford. And his reason to be there, Jackman's sole reason to be there, and as long as he has to be there, is to hold back Curtis until the wagon train clears. So keep that. About 5 o'clock in the morning, Pleasanton is advancing on the Little Blue. He finds the bridge has been burnt. He takes time then to build a new bridge, hastily, and he crosses there and the ford to the north. The ford to the north is approximately where Blue Mills Road crosses the river today, just slightly to the north of that. That's where the ford was at the time. General John McNeil takes the lead with his 2nd Brigade, which is made up of the 13th Missouri Cavalry under Catherwood and the 17th Illinois under Beveridge. Keep this time in mind. 10 o'clock a.m., 10 a.m. in the morning. Remember, Shelby and Jackman are fighting over to the west. At 10 a.m. in the morning, just east of Independence, Pleasanton's forces make their first contact with Price's forces. 10 a.m. in the morning. Price's rear guard is made up of men out of Fagan's group. They are under command of a Simon and Cabell. And they're supported by Captain Hughes, if that's the correct pronunciation, battery of 2 Parrott guns. They desperately try to hold back the federal forces. Pleasanton is there with, what, 5, 6, 7, under 10,000 men, but you're not talking about, there's a disparity there. And so they make several determined stands holding up Pleasanton as much as they can because they understand they're biding time. They're trying to hold Pleasanton back so that Price can achieve his goal of getting the wagon train south. Sometime around 3 p.m., the Confederate forces and the Union forces separate somewhere to the east of Independence. They separate. The Confederates continue on through town, and they set up a line of battle. That line of battle is approximately, the Cabell marker is there at River Street and Lexington, the Community of Christ Temple, that area. That's approximate line of battle for them. And the Union forces regroup and form up for the final push to push the Confederate forces out of town. And that happens and starts about 5 o'clock. Cabell and Simon are both waiting in their line of battle. And the battle that takes place, the initial parts of this battle is urban battle in the streets of Independence. The best I can read from the sources, it's not one of men standing up against men. It's more of a squad of men firing into another squad of men. Well, it's down streets, cross streets and all those kind of things. So it is a determined stand by the Confederates within the city limits of the time, because the Cabell marker is outside the city limits, okay? It is a determined one, and you'll read reports of the citizens with reports of cannon being fired off and the gunfire and some sniping being done from second floor windows, and there's people dying in the streets. So whereas it's not a set battle there is a desperate fight going on in the streets of Independence, and it lasts a while. But eventually numbers do tell anywhere you go, and the Federal forces do push the Confederates to the Cabell line. What we need to pick up, if I got that on here, here we go. This is, I'm reading my sign on here, which is hard for me to read too. This is about 3 o'clock till dark, approximately. Here is the Cabell line, and Marmaduke's people start back here. I've got them on the map here. They're actually fighting further back towards the Rock Creek crossing, and we'll get to them in a minute. They push through. We need to pick up with Colton Green. Colton Green is the 3rd Missouri. He's of Marmaduke's division, and he was picketing the approaches from the south and the west with orders, and he's at Rock Creek, by the way, okay, with orders to hold that position until relieved, and that position would put him somewhere just slightly west of Rock Creek crossing. John Clark, another of Marmaduke's division, with Woods, Burbridge, Lothar, Kitchen, and Jeffers, are camped at Rock Creek. Can't say it right now. Okay. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the Union forces begin their push through town, their final push. The 13th Missouri under Catherwood, which is right here, where he's at, are in front, supported by the 7th Kansas under Malone, the 17th Illinois under Beveridge, and the 2nd Arkansas Union under Phelps. They charge through the town from the northwest and take the rebels, the Confederate forces, Cabell's forces in the flank. The 2nd Arkansas, rushing into town, is slightly in advance and are dismounted, and went through the streets, ditches, and across enclosures and lanes of the town until they slammed into Cabell and Simon, the 2nd Arkansas Union. The 13th Missouri, which is supported by the 17th Illinois and the 7th Kansas, charged from the east through the streets of Independence again, spreading out through the streets and raced towards the western city limits, which is right here. A small line of Confederates tried to slow the attack, but after a short resistance and some firing of cannon, they saw the overwhelming numbers coming their way and decided to catch up with everyone else headed west. Now let's see. Though the 13th Missouri in the middle, the 17th Illinois on the left, and the 7th on the right, advancing through the gardens and yards, they attacked the Confederate position on the west side of town, which is here again. A quick charge was made, and as I said, the Confederate forces cut the artillery traces on their artillery horses, and they start to leave. They're jumping on them and heading west, and here's where Cabell is almost captured for the first time. They say he jumps his horse, and being the excellent horseman that he was, rides through, as the story goes, rides through a dog trot cabin and makes his escape to the west. It doesn't last an awfully long time here, best I can tell from the reports, but it is one of great importance. If Cabell and Simon do not make this stand at this point, then down the road, we'll read here in a second, Greene, right here, Greene is not going to be able to do what he has to do. There's an interesting letter, I don't know if how many of you have read it, written by Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill was sitting on her, we believe she was a sister to the occupant of what is now the, we lost all those, Wagner Gates, the Wagner house or the Gates house, whatever, what is the name of that place? Forgot it all of a sudden. But she sits there and she writes this, and that's reports from the house. She said the Confederates began to retreat about 3 o'clock, fighting desperately every foot of the way. They passed through town again, firing with small arms at the oncoming Federals. The latter pushed so closely that at times they were not further than 90 yards behind the Confederates. From the balcony in front of our house, we had a clear view of the battle for more than a mile. We saw the Federals capture a battery in Noah Miller's field. It was magnificently defended and no less bravely attacked. We could see the far-off flash of red fire coming out of the guns and the pistols, and the men fell by the dozens. It was one of the most sublimely thrilling sights that no one can imagine. Only a woman could write that.
Yeah.
Only a woman could write that. It's the Bingham Wagner estate, by the way, here. She's watching from here. This is, in this area, is Noah Miller's field at the time. Only a woman would write that description. Now, having cleared the town, Sanborn and McNeil, Federal, remained in town to do cleanup and take care of the dead and wounded. The local bank was used as the Union Hospital, and the Union and the bank that always plays in all the stories is the McCoy Bank or the Southern Bank at the time, which is where Be There Now is standing on the west side of the square. There's a plaque on it, and the Jones Hotel was used as a Confederate hospital. The Jones Hotel no longer exists. It's the parking lot next to the Barrow Theater. It existed until about 1976. With the battle within the confines of Independence not progressing really well for the Confederacy, Marmaduke orders Brigadier General Clark to support and halt the Federals. He spent the night at Rock Creek, and Pleasanton now sends the 4th Iowa under Winslow, the 1st Missouri, the 4th Missouri, the 7th Missouri under Brown after the retreating Confederates. The 1st was in the center, the 4th was on the left, the 7th was on the right, and all were fighting dismounted. Winslow and the 4th Iowa come up to support the flanks, and after 2 hours of fighting, Brown's men report being out of ammunition, and the train is detained in Independence and they disengage. This is the fight that's going on as we fight towards the crossing. The fight Winslow now, with the support of the 3rd Iowa, continues this fight. This is the stuff from here that continues over to the Rock Creek crossing. And where's it at? Oh, there it is. From the OR, this is going to be interesting to read this because it's very small writing. Let me stand over here when I get some light.
Is there one light we can
Oh, no, I'm
turn
fine.
on
I'm
maybe
fine.
to help you see?
No, this is fine. This is Clark's report. It was written in Red River, Arkansas, December 19th, 1864. He writes of the Second Battle of Independence. On the same evening, Independence was captured, the Confederate capture of Independence. My brigade encamping 2 miles beyond the town on the Westport Road, which would put them just about Rock Creek. On the morning of the 22nd, Fagan's division being hotly pressed from the rear, General Marmaduke sent me an order to form line of battle at some suitable point near my encampment, some 2 miles from Independence, as support to Freeman's brigade, which was formed in my front, some half mile. Fagan's division having been pressed back, and then Freeman's brigade, the enemy came within range of my artillery, which is Pratt's. And for about a half hour before sundown, which was immediately opened and checked his advance. That was about a half hour before sundown that the Federal troops make contact with Clark. Actually, okay. I formed, then falling back about a mile to the west, under directions from Major General Marmaduke, I formed my brigade in order of battle of columns of regiments as follows. Woods Battalion, Burbridge's Regiment, Lawther's Regiment, Kitchen's Regiment, and Jeffrey's Regiment to await the advance of the enemy. I was advised that the resistance must be stubborn, and as there was heavy fighting in front and the rear of the train was only a short distance in advance. Here it is in the evening. That train has been on the road since 9 o'clock that morning, and the rear of it is only a mile or 2 miles past Rock Creek. The enemy, having now engaged the army both front and rear, and possibly elated at having driven the rear of the column over 12 miles of hard-fought ground, and knowing from the report of their guns in advance that the relative position of the contending forces had slightly changed, notwithstanding the almost impenetrable darkness of the night, they rushed upon us with reckless fierceness, and I've never seen equal, giving us warning of confidence reposed in the efficiency and number of their troops, in case we were pressed to a general engagement. First, Woods Battalion was driven back, and then Burbridge Regiment, then Kitchen's, then Lawther's, and last Jeffers, who contended the longest and last with this fierce advance. The dark obscurity that enveloped friend and foe alike was only relieved by the bright flash of our guns, and the death-like stillness that reigned in the forest around us was only broken as volley answered volley down the contended forces. Our loss was heavy, but especially the regiment of gallant Jeffers. When he sets up columns of regiments, the best description I can give you that's out in the world is columns of companies. columns of companies were said to be, there were two ways they could be, or three ways that they would be set up. You would have a column of company, and then a space, I'm trying to remember how many spaces it was, but it's enough room between the rear of the column of company in front of you and the front of the column behind you that you could form in line of battle. That's if they were at full distance. If they were at mass distance, that means that the column of company in front, the second one behind them, was no more than 6 paces behind, if they were in massed. So I would guess, in this, and it's not in the OR, it says exactly what it is, but I would say that these regiments in column of regiment were more towards the latter, with some distance in between. And they were giving everything they got, obviously, that evening, especially the gallant Jeffers. Okay, let's see, get caught. Now the fight continues that way down the Independence to Westport Road until approximately 10:30 at night. And that's well after dark. As you can tell from the report I just read, the only reason they could tell for the dark obscurity was the flashes of their guns. So that's the only way they could tell who they were. So about 10:30 at night, both sides finally disengage. The Confederates to go on to cross Byram's Ford, the Federal forces to rest, and the Confederate forces to rest. The Federal forces take up position on the hill over Byram's Ford. Both sides are licking the wounds, both sides are reorganizing, and both sides are getting ready for what they know is going to happen tomorrow, the 23rd of October. That's the fight of independence. Remember, I told you to remember a time? 10 o'clock in the morning? A lot of people in the world will say that the beginning of the end of Price was at Westport. I contend the beginning of the end of Price's raid was the Second Battle of Independence at precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning. Because it's the first time that he has to fight on two fronts. The first time. Up until then, he's always been leading, always been advancing. But it's at that point, at 10 o'clock in the morning, a little bit earlier for him, that he has to decide what he's going to do. And what he decides to do is turn south. It was the right decision to make. The wrong decision was to not take that wagon train and put it to the side of the road. It begins, as we know, it continues to cause him problems. But 10 o'clock in the morning on October 22nd, 1864, is when Price's raid ends, I'm convinced, and Price's retreat begins. Oh, this one here. Marmaduke's brigade with the order of battle back through, down the road. This is the stadiums, Byram's Ford Road ran through the middle of the stadiums, and that's where they're headed to. And they fight across that ground all the way to Byram's Ford, where they disengage. And that's it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So what all was in that wagon train?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't have it in front of me tonight, Larry, but Price's orders were to not molest anybody in the world, but what he had been gathering along was the material of the war. He was gathering guns, he was gathering food, he was gathering all the things he knew that he needed. And it just kept building and building and building. There's no reports, well, I'm sure there are reports, I haven't come across them, that enumerates it exactly, but you have to understand, he's part of this raid's reason for being is to get that stuff that they didn't have in Arkansas anymore, especially where he was going back to in Arkansas, where they lived, for the last 3 or 4 years. They were pretty much denuded of anything, so he needed to bring that with him. So that was it. And the other part of Price's raid was, he was always convinced every time he came into Missouri that everybody was going to rally to him, and I don't know that ever, some did, that ever happened in the masses that he wishes. And the third was, is they were hoping to divert troops from Petersburg, where Lee was at the time, so he could break out. And they did. They were successful in some respect, because there were some troops that were on their way to Memphis, on their way to the east, that were diverted back to Missouri. And I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. And I think the third and the fourth reason would be that they wanted to, remember this is election year, October?
Right.
And I think they wanted to disrupt the election in the north. And maybe get McClellan elected. And I don't think none of that really happened. So. But the orders from Kirby Smith, there's a whole string of orders. I'm sorry I don't have it in my head, but it was to you were to do these things.
Forage a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And here's a group of people, they're going through there that a large percentage of Price's men are unarmed when they begin. They don't have any guns. John?
You didn't mention the railroad cut. I've noticed that marker's been missing for several months.
It's been missing for almost 2 years. I'll give you some idea of that. The railroad cut, I think, is the first day. Is when the Federals hold up there and get pushed through. So that's really the night before the Battle of Independence. The marker, though, in a snowstorm a year, almost 2 years ago, it was hit by a car.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the sign itself was saved. The post it was on was destroyed. And I just got word, working with the City of Independence actually, and the tourism department, Corey Day, that sign is being sent off to the maker back east, I don't remember where it's at now, to have, there's a little bell shape on the bottom.
Yeah.
That went on the top of the post. That was destroyed. So they're sending it back east, Ohio I think it is, to have it refurbished and remade and replaced. And I've been pushing them because I keep saying this 150th anniversary of this movement, it's got to be there.
Yeah.
It's got to be there. Unfortunately, it sits right next to the road where it's going to be susceptible to somebody hitting it.
Yeah, I'm surprised it never got hit.
Well, I thought we were extremely fortunate that somebody didn't steal it.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to the Cabell marker 4 or 5 years ago. They got hit, laid on the side of the ground, somebody came along and said, hey, that's pretty cool. I stole it.
One of the markers you guys put up there by Salem Church, I noticed about a year ago it was almost completely unreadable.
Yeah, we're replacing it. And the Civil War Round Table, Western Missouri, we placed 2 markers on the Little Blue Battlefield. One is up on top of the hill in the park there across from Salem Church, and the other is down at the junction, Ripley Junction. The one on top of the hill, it's been there about 5 years, so we got 5 years of life out of it, and it is to the point of not being readable, and we just purchased a new panel for it. The other one, somebody helped us out here a little while back. We don't know what they did to it, but it's we're having to replace the entire marker because the last time I looked at it, it was been like this in the middle.
Oh, really? I see.
Yeah. Somebody actually took a chain and it looks like they tried to pull it out of the ground. Little they know that it's about this far in the ground and totally encased in concrete. So I hope they tore the bumper off. So we're in the middle of replacing those, and they're not. The sign panels aren't too bad. About $150 for the panel once the artwork is done. It's the low profile marker that's. I think this is coming up to total all in $1,500. So we're replacing it, but it's, if you're not familiar with it, and we'll get it out there, as soon as we get it made, get it sent over, it tells the story of the Battle of Little Blue at the crossing, and it dovetails in with the marker that was put out by the Homeland Society several years ago, in '76. We tried to not retell that story, but tell that part of the story. And then up on top of the hill, it actually tells the 11 o'clock movement that day, showing map troop movements. There's a great quote about the battle there too. I forget his name now. But it's always been a contention of, did the Lawson War home take part of the battle? And there's a, can't remember the captain's name, but he talks about going down the lane and seeing a brick house on the right-hand side of the road and going into the gully behind it and parking the horses there, if you will, and charging the house. So that's the loss of one.
Anything else for Mike?
Yeah, I had a question about the Second Colorado. You had mentioned a couple diaries. Do you have access to those diaries, the Second Colorados by chance?
One's published.
Is it?
Yeah, one is published.
Where would I find that at?
Amazon.com,
Okay.
where everybody finds everything. And there's Mrs. Williams, who wrote 3 years or 3.5 years in the Army, who was the wife of the bugler of Company C, I believe it was. She, her book is in reprint again. It's, one of those kind of things, but it is interesting. And one that's out there, I can't remember the soldier's name. And the other one that I have is not in print. It was given to me by a personal friend of mine, who just happened to hand me the whole thing last night. His ancestor was in the Second Colorado.
The reason why I mention that is I went to high school with a guy by the name of Harry Saltershot, and I don't know if you've seen any of his writings before. The Second Colorado was actually in a battle at Fredericksburg, north of the river, which is a golf course, Excelsior Springs, right there, about 3 or 4 miles north of where Buddy Bill Anderson was killed or whatever. And the same gentleman that I was just referred to that I went to high school with is kind of really looking for some Second Colorado information. I try and pass along the information that I come across anyway on them, so.
Well, the diary I was handed last night, I just had a chance to barely flip through it, but it talks about the Battle of Camden Point.
Okay. I didn't know that that was going to be my next question. What's the time frame of that diary? Basically just did it to
I'm
include
talking about
that.
Union unit in front of all the Sons of Confederate veterans, I apologize. The Second Colorado was in independence from January of '64 through about November of '64, so that battle was sometime in the spring. I don't have it exactly when it was. They were actually on their, hoping to be sent back to Colorado in about July, because there was an Indian uprising out there, and they wanted to get back and save their people. That's when, just when they're about ready to go, when the word of Christ's coming starts to filter through. And so they're held, they fight at Little Blue, they are positioned over at the main crossing there.
I don't have the exact dates in my head right now, but I know Buddy Bill Anderson was chased basically across the county, Ray County, Carroll County, and he actually went to my cousin had a recruiting camp in Griffin Springs, down in Howard County. He was Captain Foot in Eagles Fall, was a Confederate guerrilla, and that's where he's run that up. And I'm trying to, like I said, I don't have the date in my mind anyway, is that exactly when they were chasing him across over Carroll County, and they got tired at the Grand River. The Union soldiers gave up on the Grand anyway, and then he went unopposed on into Howard County. And
He's killed sometime right around the battle we're talking about tonight.
Right, I don't live too far from where he was actually killed right there, so.
Big reenactment up there this year.
Yeah, I'll be there.
By the way.
Where's that at?
Up at,
It's Oric, it was actually called Albany before Oric was a town.
Oh, yeah.
It's the Albany one coming up.
A lot of my relatives actually homesteaded Oric and the Albany area right there. In fact, on my wife's side of the family, the gal that ratted out Buddy Bill Anderson is buried in my wife's family cemetery. Is Mary Rowland.
oh, okay. There's a big reenactment there. The Kansas City Round Table, along with the Modesto State, they're still in existence, but the Byram Sport people are going to put on a reenactment on the same date as the one in Albany. My group will be giving tours of Battle of Little Blue in the morning of the 28th, 27th, whatever date that is. Or, I don't have the date, I think it's the 18th, excuse me, it's a week before. We're giving, there's be more info. We're giving battlefield tours in the morning, and in the afternoon, I'm stretching the group just a little bit. We're going to try our hand at acting and having a multimedia event depicting the Second Battle of Independence as talked, as brought forth by first-person accounts or little historical background type things. Trying to get it all together. More meetings next week, but realizing the importance of it. The battle, I go back to it for a second. The Second Battle of Independence does get glossed over a lot, and I think for the point I make is that that is the beginning and end of Price. And it is right here.
One of the books, that I think it's still available, is Fred Lee's book, Gettysburg of the West. And there's a lot of stuff in there about out in the blue, going through independence. One of the old books by Crittenden on the Battle of Westport interviews William Sidney Shepard, who was the last Union veteran alive when they finally had he's the one that decided when that marker would be put up at 63rd and Paseo. And Fred Lee takes a lot of William Sidney Shepard's information and puts it in his book too. So even if you can't get Crittenden's book, yeah, I think you can still get Fred Lee's book.
Yeah, you can. I think they've reprinted it. There was a little bit of controversy between the Westport Historic Society and the Harris Carney House of that whole, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, Fred used to belong to the Westport Historical Society, and then he had done a publication on the Battle of Westport when he belonged to the Westport Historical Society. And when he left, and he did this Gettysburg of the West. So
yeah, you can still get well, it used to be a little blue book about like that, or the other one that he wrote.
Yeah,
was
the other
like
one,
this.
yeah.
There's two of them out there, and they're still available. A little hard to find some of them, but those are great. Crittenden's is good. There's a great map down at the Kansas City Library up in the Missouri Valley Room that they laid out in the 20s, and it says these are the roads that were there at the time of the battle. I also have, I could show you from here, I think, 1872 ownership map for Jackson County that predates the 1877. And the cool part about it is, but you have to have the notes, is that W.C. Hickman was hired by the Jackson County to go through and make an inventory of roads. And as he went through making an inventory of roads, he would write little things like, Confederates camped here. Or this is the way the road looked at the time. And the Battle of Little Blue, we discovered something from that. We used to always think, if you've been out there, on the north side of the line of trees that goes from the Ripley Junction Park there, straight east, there's a line of trees there. Well, it was always thought that that was the road at the time. Unfortunately, it wasn't, because now looking at these Hickman notes, the road actually was on the south side of the trees and crossed just about where the railroad bridge crosses down. So we were about 100 yards off. But now, what we thought the road was before was a road up until the 30s when the bridge finally washed out for the last time. So there was a covered bridge there.
All right, guys, we better wrap it
We gotta
up.
move on, I'm sorry.
You gotta
Like
get
the
to
rest
that
of our
all important
talk.
part of the business meeting, you know? Let's give them a hand.